Hi guys, today I want to show you a very good method to learn a scale on a bass and what a scale actually is and how you use them. So all any scale is, and I'm going to show you 4 today, but any scale, of which there are hundreds, all the scale is just a collection of notes with a certain formula. So to explain that further, I'll just show you, if you don't already know, what a tone and a semitone is. So that's a whole step or a half step. It's the same concept. So if you say go to the 3rd fret of the G string, the note B flat, one tone higher than that is the 5th fret. So if there's a gap of a fret in between 2 notes on the same string, that's called a tone, okay? And a semitone is half that. So 3rd fret to 5th fret is a tone. 5th to 7th, tone. And a semitone would just be no gap, just literally 3rd fret to 4th fret. Sounds like the Jaws theme, a semitone, okay? So those 2 words are really important that you know what a tone and a semitone is, okay? What we'll do is we'll start with a major scale. And all a major scale is, it's a collection of notes that has this formula. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. One very good way to visualize that on a bass is to just play the scale across one string. So let's do that. So we'll start in this example here. You can do this starting on any note, but in this example we'll do A. So we'll go 2nd fret G string. Now from that note, that's where the first tone occurs. So basically a tone is when you go 2 frets higher, and a semitone is where you go 1 fret higher. Okay, so from the A we go tone. So that's 2nd fret to 4th fret. We do another tone to the 6th fret. We do a semitone now. And then 3 tones. So tone, 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 semitone. That's all that a major scale is. If you play a collection of notes with that formula anywhere, you'll get a major scale. This little pattern here is a very common way of playing it on a bass, where you go across the fretboard. So starting on the 5th fret of the E string with your 2nd finger, so going finger 2 to 4, fret 5 to 7, and then fingers 1, 2, 4 on frets 4, 5 and 7 on the A string, and then fingers 1, 3, 4, frets 4, 6 and 7 on the D string. So that's a tone, tone, another tone. So we've got our first 2 tones, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semi. Wherever I am, I know the pattern in reverse as well. So I'll take you through the 3 other scales that I'm demonstrating in this lesson, but in terms of what scales do, I mean, they do everything you want musically, really. But just to demonstrate a few ideas, triads, arpeggios, chords, if you're not really quite sure what those mean, I will be doing videos on that very shortly, and if you head to onlinebasscourses.com, I've got more there to explain it. But really, scales, triads, chords, arpeggios, that's really what you're hearing in music, and so much of music anyway. So let me just demonstrate a few things. So let's just say I've got I'm going to make this up as I go. That's the thing. If you have got a major scale under your fingers, you know how to do it. You can make things up literally as you go. A little bit obvious there, playing the scale from the top. Sounds quite happy. The major scale has that kind of bright quality to it. Now a chord, I'll quickly explain it actually, because once you know what a scale is, it's quite easy. There's your collection of notes from the major scale. If you play the 1st, the 3rd and the 5th, you get what's called a triad. If you add the 8th note or the octave to it, you have an arpeggio. And if you play those notes together at the same time, you don't have to play all of them, just a combination of 3 or more of those notes. You get a chord. Now, as a bass player, you might not play a chord very often, although there are loads of things you can do with a chord. not really for this lesson, you have the building blocks really of all music. Now let's move on to the minor scale. So we've just done the major scale. The minor scale has more of a kind of, it's classically taught as major's happy, minor's sad. Minor you hear a lot in rock music, so if you're into that, this is a good scale to learn. Now actually perhaps I'll just quickly mention one thing going back to the major scale. It has 8 notes, 7 different notes. Now if you take away the 4th and the 7th notes, that 4th one and that 7th one, you just don't play them, you get what's called the pentatonic scale, the major pentatonic scale. The guitar line from My Girl is just that. Loads of bass lines use this scale. So that scale very much is formed from a major scale, and again, it's got its own formula, okay? Pentatonics, it's got 5 notes. The 6th note is just the first note all over again. So it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those notes. That was those 5 notes just played elsewhere on the bass. Okay, so just a little kind of tip there is just you really do need to learn your pentatonic scale because it's used all the time. So moving on to minor, this has its own formula, which we'll look at now. So going across the string, starting from an A again. Last time we had tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone for a major scale. And I kind of used to remember that it's just 2 T's and an S and then 3 T's and an S, and I just planted that into my head and I knew it going upwards and downwards. And since a tone is just that distance on a bass guitar going across one string, you can really start to visualize the scale as well as hear it in your head a bit better. So we'll start the minor scale on the same note, the A on the 2nd fret. And this has a different formula, all of its own. And this formula makes it sound like this. It doesn't sound like the major scale. The minor is used a lot more in rock music, and it's got that sort of darker quality to it. So starting on the 2nd fret of the G string again and going across one string, we now get a tone. Starts off the same, then it goes semitone. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. So that is going across one string, and that formula gives you the natural minor scale. Starting on the 5th fret again of the E string, we get exactly the same formula. So you get a tone and then a semitone. Now, if we were going across one string, a tone is 2 frets away from whatever note you're on. But as is the case on a bass, it's just the way it's kind of designed. There are 2 patterns for almost everything. At least 2 patterns, probably more. So if you're on the, for example, 8th fret, 1 tone higher is the 10th fret. But it's also, so if you put your little finger on the 8th fret now of the E string, a tone is also when you go to the next string and you go this way 3 frets. It's the same thing. So you really should learn the same pattern, maybe 2 shapes of the same pattern at least. Either way, going across the fretboard, we get that pattern for the natural minor scale. So this is great for kind of riffs. You can hear it's got that kind of darker and definitely rock quality. Loads of rock riffs use this. In the same way that you got a pentatonic scale from the major scale, you can do it with this natural minor scale as well. And this time, if you just get rid of the 2nd and 6th notes of the natural minor scale, you're left with a minor pentatonic scale. So that's the 2nd note and the 6th, 6th. Get rid of those. That comes from the minor pentatonic scale. The first 3 notes, sounds like smoke on the water. Now that is a good little tip to learn the sounds of these scales. Since I just said to you that all music comes from these scales, if you can find musical sounds that you already know and you can link it to these shapes, then you can start to condition your ear, train your ear to the sounds of these scales, arpeggios, triads, modes, all those fancy words. It's just sounds, really, and that's a really good tip to do. Again, that'll be another video, so make sure you subscribe and stay tuned, because I'm going to do a few little short videos like this to explain these really, really important ideas. So that would be your natural minor scale. So we had a riff there. What about like if you're playing a bass line and you want to play a fill? So at the beginning I showed you the scale going across the G string. Let's just take those first 3 notes actually. I'm going to move them to the 7th fret of the D string. So let's just say I'm playing like this. I'm just literally playing an A on the 5th fret of the E string. You could even play just the open string. And I just did a little fill by just playing the notes of that scale. And since I know it's a tone followed by a semitone, I don't think in that way anymore. I know the pattern so well that it's just ingrained in there. But if you learn it as a formula like this, it makes it much easier to map out on the bass fretboard. So you just slid to the 7th fret, back to the 7th fret of the A string, 9th fret D string, 10th fret D string. Okay, now just to illustrate the point here, to hammer this point home, I'll show you 2 other scales that, I mean, you probably, you know, most music that you're going to want to play at the moment, I would say, especially, you know, rock, pop, I don't want to generalize and guess what you like, but loads of rock and pop music does use the major and the minor scales that we've just learned, okay? This next one is a bit more specialized, but really I'm just showing you a point here, which is if you learn a formula which translates and maps to a pattern on the bass, then scales are really easy to learn. So this one is the diminished scale, and the formula here, this is called a symmetrical scale because, as you can see from the pattern, it is the same all the way through. So again, we'll start on the A, and the pattern is just a semitone or half step followed by a tone or a whole step. So semitone, tone, all the way through. So from the A, you got a semitone, which is 2nd fret to 3rd fret. And then from that note, we have a tone, and then a semitone, tone. It's quite easy to visualize that on the bass. And you get just loads of patterns within patterns, starting on the 5th fret of the E string. I mean, it's always, you'll see the pattern, it's always 2 frets followed by, or sorry, 1 fret, which is your semitone, followed by 2 frets, which is your tone, okay? And that would be a diminished scale. And then you have the last example. I might show you one more actually as a bonus, but one last example is the whole tone scale, and that is just exactly as the name suggests. The pattern is tones this time. So as you can see from here, it's just literally 2 frets every time. That just reminded me, there's that bit in The Simpsons that goes, no, was it? In that bit in The Simpsons, that's a whole tone scale in the theme tune for that. And yeah, this is probably a bit more of a specialized scale that you'd hear in jazz. There's definitely a Dream Theater riff that I have learnt before that uses a little bit of whole tone in there. So yeah, look at the pattern starting on the 5th fret of the E string. You've got that whole tone pattern, that's everywhere. Fret 5 to 7 to 9. And then when you get to that note, a tone crossing a string. But I mean, that scale, you may not be using that a lot. It's a bit more specialized, but the point is, if you wanted to learn it from that formula, it's extremely easy to do so. And just to finish, I'll just show you another one. Now, this is called the diminished whole tone, and you may think it just sounds like a horrifically difficult thing, complex idea with that kind of a name, but it's not. It starts off diminished, which we've just learned. So if we went from A, that's diminished. Remember, you've got your semitone, tone. Now this particular scale goes semitone, tone, semitone. And then at that point, when you hit the fourth note, this is just I'm thinking out loud here. This is how I learn it. Diminished, and then from there it is whole tone. So there's A on the 2nd fret of the G string, and on the 14th fret is the octave. So that's where I need to end up. So from that point there, it's all whole tone, which, as we know, is just 2 frets every time. Mucked it up there. Let me start again. Semitone, whole tone, semitone, and then whole tone from here. That is a mode that comes from the melodic minor scale. Now, if you are a beginner, you won't really need this, and this might be a bit too complicated, but it just goes to show that is the 7th mode of the melodic minor. It's called a superlocrian. It's also called an altered scale. All kinds of horrible words, horrible names for it, but it really just is diminished whole tone. So I definitely recommend that you learn to play scales in that way. So, start going across one string and make sure you're aware of the pattern. So for major scale, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And really learn that. Going across one string, you can visualize it. But if you know your tones and semitones in any direction on the bass, so across one string, going higher, going lower, going across to a different string, from E to A string, for example, then learning scales becomes much easier. And the scales really do form the building blocks of music, along with your triads, chords, arpeggios, modes, all of those kinds of things. So there is a little PDF associated with this lesson. So if you go to www.onlinebasscourses.com, and I'll put the link below the video, you can get the PDF there, and also find a few other lessons on this. I really, really recommend that you just learn a bit of basic theory. I mean, it's not just theory that makes you a good bass player. You need to know the fretboard really well. You need to know a little bit of theory. Obviously, your technique needs to be good, your timing, your feel, all that kind of stuff. And I've got loads of lessons on that website. But also, if you subscribe to this channel, I'm going to be doing loads more of these kind of videos. Don't be put off by theory. Once you learn a few little really simple ideas, you can really take it and go forward with it. The other thing is the major and the minor scale that we did earlier on, and the pentatonic scales from those, that kind of makes up 80% of pop and rock and blues music anyway. So it's not terribly difficult to learn that and learn loads of shapes of just 1 or 2 scales, and then you're really off. The whole tone, diminished, all that kind of stuff, that's really for, if you want to get into jazz, you definitely need to know those kind of scales. But I would just recommend really, really starting simply. But the concept is the same. If you want to learn so-called difficult scales, just learn the pattern, memorize what the pattern is, and you'll map out that very visually on a bass. And then also you can link that to your ear. That's really, really important as well. So yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel. That'd be great. And if you've got any comments or anything like that, leave it below and I'll get back to you.